Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Ivy, and welcome for joining us this evening. And bearing with us with the technical problems that we are having.
I'm having.
He's having. What can I say? So we are a little bit disjointed, but thank you for joining us tonight. I appreciate it. I know a little bit about the background of what's gone on, and how important it is for you to want to share your experiences. So I just wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about where you are and, well, not where you are, but what the situation you find yourself in and how things have gone for you with the police and involved in the domestic violence that you've been a victim of.
We were referred in through Merrick. I don't know whether everybody's aware of what Merrick is. Our case was heard, or has been heard now, a total of 8 times, 6 times in my previous force area and twice in our current force area. I was referred through to Merrick through my local SARC, the Sexual Assault Referral Centre. I don't know whether everyone realises to be referred through to a Merrick.
If we just say MARAC stands for, I've got to get this right, Multi-Agency
Risk Assessment Committee.
That's right. It's like a joint panel of different bodies, including the health, the police, and social services that come together and assess the situation that somebody's in, and try to find a way to help. That's perhaps a one-line description, I think, isn't it?
Yeah. It's not something victims can't self-refer themselves into a MARAC. You get referred in through either one of the partner agencies. If a victim presents to one of those agencies, usually as soon as any domestic violence is identified, a DASH risk assessment form is filled in, which consists of 24 questions. If you score 14 or above, your case is automatically referred through to MARAC. My case was referred through it was on a Wednesday. Now, again, it differs in different regions. Some regions hold MARACs every 4 weeks. Some regions hold them every 2 weeks. They're always chaired by police. Again, it differs in different areas. Some are chaired by a sergeant. Some are chaired by an inspector. I was informed when mine first went to MARAC, it was each case is presented. You're given a 10-minute slot. As I say, victims don't go. We are represented by an IDFA, an Independent Domestic Violence Advisor. She presents your case, and obviously every agency has to come up with an action plan to basically safeguard the victim and obviously reduce the risk. I was informed. Our MARAC at that stage was the MARAC meeting was an all-day meeting, so I was told that I wouldn't get an outcome until the next day, but to make sure that I was available on the Thursday should I be needed. And I received a call on the Thursday morning asking me to go for a meeting with my IDFA and one of the domestic violence police officers. And it was then that I was told that the decision had been made that we needed to leave the family home, being myself and the 2 children, and leave the relationship. And I was told by the police officer that it was a case of not if but when I would be murdered if I didn't leave leave the family home. So it's not something you do. I mean, that was obviously a very sobering conversation that we had, and as much as you are encouraged to engage with the process, it's obviously not compulsory, and it was still my choice at the end of the day. I obviously decided to agree with that. But again, in my naivety, I assumed that I would have probably, 4 weeks or a month, whatever, to kind of pack things up and sort things out. And again, the police officer said, no, it's got to be today. She made it very clear that if I was not out of the house by Friday, they had assessed the situation and had concluded that I, wouldn't be alive by the end of the weekend if I had stayed. So after that meeting, I think the policy basically, if you're fleeing as a victim, is the first place is to go to a refuge. I think they are regarded as being the safest place to go to. So we left the meeting, and my IDFA immediately started calling around to the refuge. But the refuge in our location was completely full. They had no spaces, and nor did any of the refuges in surrounding areas. Now, I'm open to correction on this, but as far as I'm aware, if there's no refuge within a 30-mile radius of where you live, it then becomes council housing. It becomes they have a duty of care then to put you into temporary accommodation. So a meeting was set up that afternoon to meet with the housing manager. Because they had obviously already been in Marek the day before, they were aware of the case, and so we were allocated accommodation. There wasn't anything available that day, so but accommodation was made available the next day. So I was told to go home, not to obviously, kind of raise any suspicions. I wasn't allowed to tell the children that we were moving, because the concern was that would obviously, create a problem. But I was told to, gather passports, birth certificates, any paperwork that we might need later on. So the next day, kind of just got up as normal. The girls, had no suspicion that they weren't going to school. And once he had left, informed the girls that we were actually leaving. Grabbed as many clothes as we could and got in the car and went back to housing. And 10 o'clock, we were given the keys to a new premises that we moved into. So, here I was, in my 40s, 2 girls to look after and no financial means to be able to do that. I hadn't worked for over 18 years. I hadn't been permitted to have a job. I didn't even have a bank account. He had literally controlled everything. And as much as obviously you can start applying for benefits, it takes a good 3, 4, even 5 weeks for any of that to kind of kick in. So for the first 4 weeks until that had happened, we were very reliant on food parcels, the food bank, donations. I literally had no financial means with which to support the children. And I think that's a very difficult thing for any parent to have to go through, not being able to provide for their kids. We then, unfortunately, at the time, our social worker who was involved in the case at that stage decided in her wisdom that it was his parental rights to know where his children were. So she disclosed our arrest. Obviously, he then found us at that address and another assault took place. So case was referred back into Marek. Decision was made for us to be relocated again. So that happened. A problem then existed is that we were moved from the south part of the county into the northern part of the county. At that time, our case was basically just being handled by our small neighborhood policing team, and for whatever reason they never handed it over to the DV unit. So when we moved into the northern part of the county, although it was obviously within the same police force, it was across divisions, and information was not shared that we had moved into the northern part of the division. So within a week of moving into that new premises again, the social worker had disclosed our address to my ex, and I started noticing suspicious vehicles being parked outside. We also had, at that stage, the house had been fitted. Every window, every door was fitted with sensor alarms. They were activated at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. We even had a suspicious person in our garden. even though I was at that stage phoning 101 and reporting these incidents, because there was no intelligence for us having moved into the area, the house that the temporary accommodation that we were staying in was in a well-known drug area, and in fact, the next door neighbour was a known drug dealer to police. So even though I was making these calls, as I say, because there was no intelligence that we had moved there and were high-risk DV victims, they kind of just put it down to being in a well-known drug area, and those kind of calls went. So it was about 10 days after my last call that again there was another very violent assault that I actually landed up in hospital. And again, the case was referred through to Marek, and they decided at that Marek meeting to hold a case conference simply because the violence was really just escalating. There was nothing seemed to be working. It was at that case conference that the decision was then made to that we had to move again. So this was our third relocation, but 100-mile radius was then drawn up that we had to move outside of that area. That decision was made on the Monday. Christmas was later that week. Christmas Day was on the Thursday and Friday. And this time I was told that it was a compulsory move. Even though I had obviously agreed to the others, it was made very clear that this was a compulsory move, and we had no option. I was desperate not to move prior to Christmas. It was, we'd already been in 3 houses in 3 months, and it was just a desperate situation. So I asked permission to stay over the Christmas weekend, and that was granted. But I was told that we had to be out by the Monday. So again, in the early hours of Monday, I packed the car and drove down to our new location. Unfortunately, no information had been passed on to them, so we arrived at the local council offices, presented at the housing department. I did have paperwork, thankfully, from the previous police department, explaining the case. But as soon as we arrived there, they were like, "Well, you can't just pitch up here. There's paperwork. There's
red tape,
wonderful
bureaucracy.
government bureaucracy that it all should have been transferred down, etc., etc." And I think at that point I just burst into tears, in terms of I had been told in no uncertain terms I couldn't go back, and the new location was telling us, well, they weren't going to accept us, and it was very much a case of, well, what do I do now? Am I just expected to get back in my car and keep driving around until somebody takes us? Thankfully, she then phoned the sergeant who had provided us with the letter, and thank heavens she was working that day, and she made it very clear that no, we couldn't go back. It was far too dangerous, and we had to stay where we were. Again, same situation. We were then referred to refuge, but again, the local refuge was completely full. They tried refuges in surrounding areas again. They were all full. So it became an issue again for the housing department for them to find us temporary accommodation, which was done. Our case was then referred obviously straight into Marek in the new location. We still had a few issues. One of the things that they tell you is that within the first 6 months is the most dangerous time if you are fleeing DV, and certainly the amount of death threats that we had were horrendous. It was an absolutely terrifying time. We had a problem, unfortunately, again. There was a lack of communication between the two police forces, and particularly for the first week that we had moved down here, obviously everybody's working on the skeleton staff because it's over the Christmas period. I didn't know who to phone. We were getting horrendous messages. The kids were getting horrendous messages through. Even though we had changed our mobile phones in the previous area, the social worker had given out our new mobile phones to my ex, all on this parental rights. And I phoned the the detective who was handling our case, he wasn't interested. He was like, well, you're in a new area, you need to phone them. But phone them when they're completely unaware of the situation. It was just a nightmare of a time.
Ivy, can I?
Yeah.
City detectives just put in the bottom there, this process takes so long, I can understand why victims give in and go back. Without the sort of go back factor, throughout this process, how many times did you think, oh, to hell with it? This is
Plenty, absolutely plenty. If it wasn't for the fact that he was abusing the kids, 100%, I would have gone back. And knowing full well that going back, I would not have survived 24 hours. I would be dead. I was more happy than face the red tape.
I've been making a few notes while you've been talking there as well, Ivy, and that's the first thing I've got on my piece of paper with big stars and asterisks around it. Is one of the very first comments you made, that it was not a matter of if not when, if not how, but when, and you have been told by the police that this person is going to kill you. How did that make you feel? I mean, or more important, or shall I really say, before somebody actually, another person turned around and said to you, this person will kill you, were you aware that was a likely outcome? Or had things got to the stage where, you just, because everything that happened to you has become so much the norm that it just didn't register how dangerous the situation you were in?
Yeah, I think, I think as victims, we minimize what happens to us. And, I think that's more of a coping strategy. Yourself, it's not as bad. Yeah, it's not as bad as what it is. And as you say, it becomes a normal part of life. So as much as I suppose I look back now and realize that I knew it was that bad. I mean, he had attempted in the past, so I was well aware of that. But I think to have somebody else tell you that, to have somebody sit down and say to you, we have recognized this, and this is what's going to happen. It was a very sobering comment.
Sometimes it does take that third party to bring the situation home.
Absolutely.
Yeah. MPS Harold Wood has just made a comment, and he's got used word I hate, but I know exactly what it means. Where he said, I said it earlier in the week on Twitter, domestic abuse should be looked at as homicide prevention. I don't like the word homicide; it's an Americanism.
Yeah, the same.
I think but murder prevention. Call it what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sort of looking at some of the statistics that you've put forward, Chaos, in the show notes. You said that 1 in 4 women in their lifetime are likely to be subject to domestic.
Oh yeah.
And that 2 women every week are killed. And so it's sort of home to you, doesn't it? That the fact that if a cop comes to you as a subject of I mean, I should say really, Ivy, thank you for speaking so openly and frankly about your experience and sharing that with us, because I don't think Chaos or I or anybody else can carry off that sort of message without you saying so. I think that those of you that are watching, I think Ivy deserves an awful lot of props, because it's one of those things where you think you can't just it's an incredible thing that you've got to be able, that you can actually speak about it and talk to us about it. It's an incredible amount of bravery. So thank you. But what was
an awful lot of cops as well as ourselves, we deal with domestic abuse incidents almost daily, and to us they become the norm, but in a different way.
Yeah.
But we don't understand that the individual victim. We understand what victims as a whole are going through, from the small part of the picture that we each pick up. But we don't quite often get to hear or follow one victim's story from beginning to end. If that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah.
We just see our little bit, and then things go away. Somebody else takes a bit. And I go back to the point that you were making there about the disjointedness when you move from division to division within the same force in the same county. Never mind crossing the county border. And that's always been a major problem in police. I mean, the big thing about was Soham and Holly and Jessica, the murders there. And one of the big things that came out that long ago, it is a number of years ago now, was the lack of information being shared between police and social services across county borders. And I know, and it's a big bugbear of mine, how difficult it is on any sort of information for myself to get information from the next station, which is a different division, different local authority area.
Yes.
It is an almost nightmare, and yet I could drive there in 20 minutes, but we are across that visible county boundary, and it is almost impossible to get information. It is easier for me to get information from the neighbouring force because I ring the local police office there. We have a very good relationship. Say, I need to know about this. We'll get a quick couple of confirmation emails, and the information's there. But the structure isn't in place, and this brings it home where we've still got an awful lot of work to do.
Definitely.
Yeah. It's also, I mean, it's also obviously between agencies as well. When we moved, one of the problems that we then had as well. I had obviously I had to report all these messages that were coming through on text, and we had a response officer come through, and I don't know whether she didn't grasp DV or whether she was just having a bad day, but she kind of just came in and she took the attitude of it's just a little spat that's going on. Now, obviously, because the person involved. My case has also been complicated that my husband involved other domestic violence. It wasn't just him. And it was one of these other individuals at the track at the time. I put in a phone call, and as much as I was trying to explain to the officer that this location was everybody knew we were the offender, and who didn't pick up, and she then left her name, the force that she was working for, and obviously a landline telephone number, which kind of just pinpointed where we had moved to. So I then faced when this was obviously found out, our current police force kind of contacted me again. We had another meeting, and it was like, look, we think you need to be relocated again. And it was at that point that I said, look, this is just ridiculous now. Relocation cannot continue to be the solution to this problem. At some point, somebody has to start managing, the breaks in communication, the amount of information that's getting out there as to where we are. And I was fortunate that the DI down here kind of completely agreed with me and said, okay, I'll support that decision. And yes, we kind of have to start putting a plan in place to ensure that that only certain people are then working on the case. But we also then had a problem because obviously with moving down to where we are now, the girls were out of school, and there wasn't a school in the area that we lived in that could take both the kids. Either they had space for the eldest, not for the youngest, or the youngest, not the eldest. And the police were adamant that both girls had to be in the same situation because at that stage, he was still actively looking for us. And it was a very probable situation that we would need to be moved in an emergency. And as the DI said, well, you all know what it's like with resources. He said, I'm going to have one car come to you, one go to the girls. I can't afford to be sending 3 cars out, one to one school, one to another school. So that became a problem. Again, it was discussed at Marek. It was all agreed by the education department that, yes, that had to happen. But again, you have to go through this whole red tape bureaucracy, had to fill in the application forms, wait 6 weeks. So both girls were out of school for 6 weeks. I chose a school that the eldest could go into. She was in her GCSE year, so I felt it was more important for her to be in schooling. She was granted a place. Obviously, we were rejected, which we knew was going to happen with the youngest. We were told, I then had to appeal that decision, had to get a letter from Marek proving our high risk, proving why the girls needed to be in the same school. The chief superintendent provided a letter stating that, it was his decision that they had to be in the same school. That whole process took another 6 weeks to happen. In that period of time, I then received a letter from the education department that I was in breach of whatever law. They thought that I was deliberately keeping my child from school. I was threatened with arrest and being fined from that part. I mean, it's a nightmare.
I've been having battles on a slightly different matter on Twitter about partnership working again. The Crime and Disorder Act, which puts an onus on partners, not just the police, but the social workers, councils, educational authorities, to work together to find a holistic solution. My argument has been that it fails. It becomes a book-passing exercise. Nobody takes responsibility. And for the most part, all of that emphasis falls back on the police. Oh, we are that service of last resort.
Yeah.
And everybody that says to me, oh, no, that's not the case. We've got to work together because it's wonderful. And everything you've just said just proves the point that the whole system has failed you.
Yeah.
Because partnership working does not exist.
Yeah.
The police have made that request for a very valid reason for your safety. We are the primary person to take responsibility for your safety in those circumstances.
Yeah.
The other agencies are not. We've obviously discussed issues where the police can't talk to each other, but that's signified. It's got you that far. The police encourage you to move to a different part of the country. So everybody else has let you down.
One of those things that we sort of have in policing now is that we've become increasingly, I think, and without sort of causing a stir on the sideline, because there's still an awful long way to go, and clearly, Ivy, in your case, there's a huge way to go. But we are becoming increasingly victim-focused in the delivery that we actually offer as a service, as opposed to ticking boxes and rigidly applying policy. There's certainly in my time in custody and certainly in my time now in the control room is that we're far more victim focused and say, what does this victim want? What is it that this person wants and how can we meet that need? As opposed to saying, you can't have that, you can't do that, you can't do the other. But I sometimes think that particularly when we start involving a huge number of other agencies as well, it just gets stability, and that's something that you've got to do, and it all seems to start getting these interwoven arguments between different departments within local authorities and police services and voluntary sectors perhaps as well, and somewhere in the middle is a victim who is thinking, and like you said, it took you 6 weeks to sort the school thing out. You think there's 6 weeks to sort the school out. And in between all that, you've got everything else going on as well. And you think, we're still not doing enough, are we?
Ivy, do you think the IDFA, the Independent Domestic Violence Advisor and Inspector, do you think that role would be an ideal sort of a focus point? Because they know your case, or they know the case you're dealing with. Do you think they should be given more power to actually overwrite all these stupid decisions and to chew through the red tape? Because they've got the bigger picture, haven't they? And they can
definitely. I mean, my current IDFA has been an absolute lifesaver. To be honest, if it wasn't for her, I would definitely. I wouldn't be alive today if it wasn't for her. I'm fortunate. I'm very fortunate in that in this area, my IDFA it's a local government funded role. So as much as she's independent, it is funded by the government, and her role is seen as a professional role within MARAC. My previous area, my IDFA was linked to a charity, so she came through victim support, right. And unfortunately, not even the police gave her role any kind of authority. She was seen to be working for a charity, and she literally had no voice. So as much as she was fighting for me and giving me advice when things were going wrong with all the agencies, particularly with social services, I mean, the social workers wouldn't even speak to her. So it differs from area to area, but definitely your IDFA is an absolutely vital role. And to me, they should all be, should all almost come from local government funding. It should be, it's a professional role and needs to hold that status.
I was just thinking that was one of again making a note, and it seems to me, just listening to your story there and knowing the work that we have up here and the interaction we have, that they do seem to be in that position to hold the ideal focal point, because if they were given the standing, given the stature, and given the power and the control to manage a situation, it does seem that the IDFA is the ideal sort of rock, if you like.
Absolutely, because I mean, don't forget that even if you're going through MARAC, you don't, as a victim, you still have the choice of whether you taking on a criminal case. So not all victims, even though you're going through MARAG, it's not a compulsory thing.
No.
You obviously have the police involvement in terms of them doing a risk assessment and giving a coming up with an action plan. But there are a lot of victims, as you've already mentioned, that don't take any further action with the police. So your IDFA in that role, she obviously understands and she tends to, certainly mine came with me to every meeting, whether it was a meeting with social services, whether it was with housing or whatever. So she has a complete, as you say, the big picture.
I'm just thinking that, and I see Nathan's in the room just for a short while, I think, because he can't stop, I don't think. But one of the things that has come up recently within policing is the use of these mental health triage cars. And without going off on a tangent and a complete other sort of can of worms, what I have found, despite my criticisms and certain uncertainties about whether mental health triage cars are actually going to work, what I have found that on a couple of occasions, the mental health nurse who is involved with the whole investigation side of things comes along and says A, B, C, D, E, and her or his fellow professionals take it as gospel.
Yeah.
Because this nurse is actually working with us and can see what we've got. And when they say, oh, well, we're not, I've had quite a few instances where the mental health, we said, oh, no, we're not doing that, blah, blah, blah. And there's been a bit of rancor between us and the AMF and so on. And the mental health nurse has come along and says, well, actually, you've got a duty under this, that, and the other, and blah, 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 and you need to do it. And suddenly everything's changed. So it's quite interesting. You think, is there a role to sort of get social services or independent domestic violence advocates or these kind of specialists who've got these hooks into these other organisations and the other public sector agencies that can make a difference, that they actually come with us? Is there a space for that? We have a mental health triage car. Do we have a domestic violence, a domestic abuse team in a car?
There is. I can't remember which police force it is. They do actually have. I know they started a trial. It was more over weekends, and I think it was linked to victim support. And they did have an IDFA going out with them. Funnily enough, I actually discussed it with my IDFA while we were down at our court case, and I said to her, did she think it was a good idea? And she said the problem is, from her perspective, she doesn't want to be seen to be linked with the police, only because
it's the independence angle, isn't it?
Exactly. I think, as victims, it's terrifying at times to go to the police and you kind of... At the end of the day, she's the only person who is wholly on our side, particularly when you've got all these agencies telling you what you have to do. And, if you're not going to do what they state, there are consequences, et cetera, et cetera. So she just felt that she didn't particularly want to be linked that closely to the police, So I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, Chaos, you've got a figure, and I'm just trying to pull it out of your thing here. It's about.
I've got lots of figures.
Well, yeah, and a big figure as well.
Here we go. It's just a woman, on average, a woman is assaulted 35 times before the initial call to police.
Well, that's where I was coming from.
Yeah.
How many calls do we get? Was it one every minute or every 2 minutes?
One every minute within the UK.
One a minute in the UK, we get a call about domestic violence, and then you couple that with the fact that most victims of domestic abuse, how many times before they actually report? Yeah. So
adding to that, the estimates are that only between 30 and 35% of all domestic abuse is reported.
Yeah.
So you recalculate those figures up, and you're into phenomenal numbers.
And so the thing that strikes me is that you look at that and you think, imagine as yourself as an individual having been, assaulted and abused or whatever it is, 35 times, and you finally pick up the phone, get that other person on the other end of the phone, and really, we can't afford as a police service not to get that right there and then, can we? Because if we don't give the right response right at that point then and drive it forward, meeting the victim's needs but dealing with it professionally and all this of it, we're going to sort of, it's a bit like snakes and ladders, isn't it? I think we're going to knock the victim straight back down again and say, well, the police did nothing. So how many more times is this person going to be assaulted, beaten, abused before they'll actually pick up the phone again? And so it's almost like we've got to get in there and be perfect with it, which is a big ask, isn't it, to be perfect?
It is a big ask.
You know, but...
And of course, without going to the politics of it, we need the numbers of staff to do it.
So... I mean, one of the things that and it sort of stems in from what you were saying earlier on, is that the fact that domestic violence and domestic abuse and inter-family problems like this were always traditionally behind closed doors. It was always something that went on, and you don't talk about it. And when people say, "Are you all right?" or "I walked into a cupboard," and all these sort of things come out, you know, I fell down the stairs, or I walked into a tree, or whatever it happens to be, because there's this denial, because there's an embarrassment. I think there's a shame that the fact that your relationship isn't as it should be, and so you don't want to let anybody know about it. And you think about the comparison that you can draw with things like Jimmy Savile. Nobody talked about it. They knew it was going on, but nobody talked about it. Nobody talked about domestic violence. Now, Harold Sergeant Charlie Routley said before that the increase in domestic abuse reports must be a good sign. And you think, cracky, that means there's more domestic abuse reports coming through, there's more crime. No, I said, but it is a good sign, I think, because it means more people have got the confidence in us as an organisation to come forward and actually speak to us. How nice would it be to be in a situation, I'm rambling now, Anna, but how nice would it be to be in a situation where the first time anybody, male, female, or whatever, is a victim of domestic abuse, they just pick up the phone. It's so unacceptable that they just pick up the phone and say, I'm not prepared, you know, and that doesn't necessarily mean following down and, right, we're going to come down and boot the door in and arrest the suspect and take positive action on this bit, because, but
I understand.
How do we get domestic abuse so socially unacceptable that becomes a reality?
That is the $64 million question, I think. How do we bring it to that? I mean, if you look, another set of figures which actually I haven't had a chance to send over to you at TCS, well, I was just waiting for this tonight. Do you know, does anybody shadow when the first official guidance was issued from the Home Office to police forces in the UK, or England and Wales certainly, on how to deal with domestic violence? How long ago that was? You think it's a long time. It's actually 1986. Before then, there was no guidance to police at all on how we should deal with these matters. And it goes back to that behind closed doors. Nobody recognised anything until 1986. That's not that long. I left school before then. It is that recently.
Yeah, it seems to be a long, slow process, doesn't it? Because I've seen massive, huge changes in the way that we deal with domestic abuse in my service. And you think that spans 25 years and we're still not there.
Well, no. I again want to thank you for everything you've told us so far, but one of the things I think we've touched on, I did want to, and I know it's a perhaps even more difficult thing to talk about, but the effect on the children. Because 60 to 70% of children live in homes with domestic violence, according to the statistics from Refuge and Women's Aid and other. And they say, you know, you've had the upheaval, the kids will have seen the violence, they've been pushed from pillar to post, rushed from school to school, their education suffers. What effect does it actually have on the kids?
It's been horrendous. I mean, you know, their lives have just been, you know, turned upside down, particularly when we moved down here. The decision was made because my husband had involved other individuals that we had to cut off all contact with any previous friends, family, anything that, you know, my eldest is now, you know, she's 15. They're not allowed on social media. you know, you try telling kids who, you know, and you don't get to say goodbye. You don't get to say, you know, to say goodbye to your friends. It's literally one day you're there and the next day you're not. And it's cut off. Your phones are changed. Your numbers are changed. There's no goodbyes. There's no explanation. It's been horrendous, to the point that at the start of this school year, within the first 3 weeks, my youngest walked into school one day and told the teacher she wanted to kill herself. And having to get, you know, to get that phone call from the school that a crisis meeting is now happening because your 12-year-old doesn't want to be alive. It's horrendous, and that's the extent that this has had. You know, it has a massive impact on the kids.
It does. Yeah, I mean, we say the kids not allowed on social media, and I mean, we do. I work in neighbourhoods at the moment, and we do a lot of work in schools, and we do a lot of work through social media ourselves. Not obviously, it's getting down to the Scouts and Guides groups as well, but we also have to check are we allowed to take photographs for exactly this reason, because there are cases where we're not allowed to photograph children because that image might be seen by somebody trying to track them down. And it goes one step further. When my own daughters have birthday parties, and friends come round, and you'll get parents say, "I'm sorry, but can you please make sure you don't put any photographs of my child on your daughter's Facebook, because the risk is that great that and it's things I wouldn't even have thought of, even in the job where I'm aware that I shouldn't be doing it, and we're not can't for those reasons. But when it brings it home, and my own kids have a party, and their friends can't be on these pictures for exactly the same reasons." And it's difficult to make that connection, even for somebody who's worked around this environment for 10 years or more.
It is. It's incredibly difficult. I mean, you know, she obviously goes out. The eldest goes out, you know, over a weekend with her friends, and as you say, it's, you know, all the craze. Let's take a selfie or whatever, and she can't get involved in any of that. You know, it's very difficult.
It's taking another piece of the childhood away, because as much as we all detest social media and the problem it causes with kids and sexting and things, it's part of that growing up experience of the modern age, isn't it?
Yeah. I know my eldest said to me, in fact, just last night we were chatting, and she said within, you know, with the first month that we had moved out, there were times where she actually almost despised me, to the point where it was like, for heaven's sake, can't we just go back? Can you not just put up with it? Because she was, so, you know, because her whole life had pretty much just, you know, her life as she knew it had been destroyed, and even though she was being abused, you know, for her, again, she had normalized it. It was just, you know, so yeah, it's without a shadow of a doubt, it's a massive change for the kids.
And how are things now? Have things for the children settled, or are they still?
The eldest, to be honest, since we've moved on to this new location, she's thriving, absolutely loves school, has a great group of friends, so she's really doing exceptionally well. Still struggling with the youngest. In fact, even just today, you know, drove both girls to school, and the youngest just burst into tears when we got there. So brought her back home, and it's like, you know, tomorrow's another day. We'll try again tomorrow. I'm very fortunate that the school are extremely supportive. You know, they have been fantastic. So, you know, I don't have any issues with that. You know, if she takes a day off school, she takes a day off school, and you know, the teachers kind of help her catch up with work and stuff like that. It's just, I think, certainly from the school point of view, their most important thing is obviously her emotional and mental state at this moment in time, and it's kind of like, you know, education takes a back seat, so to speak. You know, if she's not around, then obviously there's no child to educate, you know, so that's what our focus is at the moment.
We had a question from Rob France 73 way back up the text stream now, that he said, it was an odd question, you have to sort of look at it. It says, is domestic abuse reducing because reports have increased? And I had to look at that. I think, what's he talking about? But it does make sense in the fact that because more people are reporting it, is that preventing some people from becoming abusers? My view, I think we're still sort of scraping the tip of the iceberg. There's so much that's going on that we're not privy to or told, or that I think we're not going to get to a point where domestic violence is going to start reducing because of the amount of people reporting it until the figures have gone through the roof. In my thoughts, in my head. I don't know what you think, Ivy.
I think, as the problem comes as well with conviction rates and taking cases to court. It's so difficult. It's difficult to prove your case. It's so even if you're reporting it, if your conviction rates aren't going up, if there's no if there's no deterrent to it, I don't really see that as I don't particularly see it as right now at this moment in time. I don't see that as a.
Yeah.
I'm just quickly skipping down my tweets from today because there was a news article that was somewhere saying how the courts are suffering due to the surge in prosecutions being put forward for domestic abuse, and I thought that's quite interesting that the courts are now saying that they're unable to cope with the volume of cases going through, which in a way is a good thing because it says that the police are now and the CPS are now more active and we're progressing all these cases and getting that outcome. But does it mean we are getting a better outcome with a higher percentage of the existing cases, or we're getting a similar percentage on a higher number of cases that are coming forward? I'm just, whilst you were talking, I was just kind of flipped back through today's tweet to try and find the article.
That, I mean, Charlie Routley has been putting MPS Harold Wood. If you don't follow him on Twitter, give him a follow because he's well worth seeing what he's got to say. But he was saying that he thinks that we need to start focusing on 15-year-olds and educating them to be able to see and identify the signs of domestic abuse within their own and their friends' relationships. Because today's 15-year-old is tomorrow's adult, which is.
If we give them, if we can empower the children at that age to be aware of things like, oh God, certainly, it is that case of prevention, isn't it? Preventing them becoming the next victim.
Yeah,
absolutely. I know somebody asked my eldest, what did she to her, what was a good or positive relationship, and her answer was, if he doesn't hit you. And I just, that's horrendous. It's just horrendous. Horrendous that kids are growing up thinking a good positive relationship is if your partner's not hitting you. I think education is most definitely the key, and there needs to be a lot more of it at school. Healthy relationships.
I suppose it's one of those things.
Definitely.
One of those things with schools, isn't it? Is that they focus primarily on academic subjects. It's English, it's maths, it's sciences, they get into certain topics and they will discuss certain things, but it almost seems that the true life skills they either happen to catch because a school has got a certain slant in that direction and they're keen to see something done in that direction, or it's down to parents. And sometimes if parents are going through some of the things that you're going through, it's going to completely slant everything in the other direction, isn't it? And so you think, is there a responsibility for schools and academies and all the rest of it to put more effort into teaching our young adults life skills as much as we do teach them academia?
I think they are. I think that a lot of my daughter's schools, they have personal PSE, whatever it stands for, where they do look at things beyond the academic subjects, whether more information or more awareness of sort of domestic abuse related issues or awareness should be brought into them. Maybe it's perhaps something that we as police officers, when we go to schools, because we go in, we're currently cyber safety is a big issue for us at the moment, going to the schools and going around the classrooms and showing kids how to stay safe on their mobile phone. Should we therefore be going into schools and talking to children about domestic abuse at this age to create the awareness? Is it something the police could do? And this article is in the Guardian. I can't get it loaded on my tablet at the moment. So I'm having TCS tech problems.
Yeah, I mean that's a sort of, is it something the police should do, or is it, or the second part is is it something the police should be doing anyway, or is that something that is better placed in other people's hands? And I think from experience, when you think about young convicts and young lads that are going into jail and all the rest of it, they don't listen to us as cops, they don't listen to the magistrates, they don't listen to the Crown Court, they very rarely listen to their family, they get involved with all their friends who are also committing crime, so it's a cycle that continues to repeat itself and repeat itself and repeat itself. And the only real person that really gets home sometimes to these young lads who or young people or whatever they are that are getting involved in criminality is the guy that spent the last 50 who sits down and says, you don't want to do what I did, you don't want to be where I've been, and they listen, you know. And I think much in Ivy's case with Ivy's story, and this is something I've discussed with Ivy offline, is the fact that she's been through this awful I can't even begin to imagine situation. But she also has a gift in an odd way, in that she's got an experience that whenever she's ready to share that experience with other people, it will be, as today, it's a powerful message that makes people think. And you know, it's much like Neil that we had on the Drink Drive Blab, who came out and spoke so passionately and emotionally about losing his daughter, and you think people will listen to him. I can bleat on about Drink Drive all day long and nobody listens to me, and then you listen to Neil and go, you know what, I'm not going to have another one again ever.
No, we do. I mean, Drink Drive is a good one where we get people to come in, and the same with people like Leah Betts' parents who talk about the ecstasy and drug abuse, and they're very impactful because it's a real story. It's not. And the same as Neil said, it's not a couple of coppers sat in the corner saying this is going to happen to you, don't do it again. It's somebody who's there and been there, and their story has more value, I think.
Well, there's a controversial question that often comes up in things like this. Phil Stalkers has put in the side there that says, do you think that the death penalty should be brought back for murders caused by domestic violence? I know what my answer is.
I'm afraid I don't. The death penalty is not something that sits on my high on my radar. Is my answer to that?
Yeah,
I think possibly because we mistakes happen. I'm not saying mistakes happen here, but there have been 2 mistakes historically in cases where people have been put to death around the world. More so, does that not reduce us as a society?
Yeah.
Should we not be making more effort to rehabilitate and repair the damage rather than?
Yeah.
My is that no. I'm not one for the death penalty myself.
Yeah, I'm completely against it. And I think if the death penalty were a deterrent, if prison were a deterrent, well then the prisons would be empty and death row in the United States would have nobody sat on it. The fact of the matter is that it isn't, and therefore I think we need to look at other ways to deal with this sort of stuff. And some people rightly need locking up for the safety of the general public, and they need leaving there. But there's an awful lot of people that we need to perhaps be looking at in other ways. And yes, we do make mistakes, and so no, I don't think the death penalty should come back at all.
Boss just asked the question.
Ivy, what do you think?
What do you think?
No, I certainly don't agree with the death penalty, but the one question that I do have, I know that there are some courses out there that that perpetrators are sent to, to partake, however many weeks it is or whatever. Do you think that perpetrators can be rehabilitated? And I'm not talking about low level. I'm talking about high level violence. I'm not convinced that they can be rehabilitated. I'm not sure. What is your thought on that?
Cool, it's a big one, isn't it? It's like
it is difficult. So having not been in the situation, and I don't know. I mean, if you look at the volume of offenders that we deal with in many subjects, people with propensity to violently assault people in any way, shape, or form will have a history going back for years and they will continue to have a history. How we resolve that, I don't know. How do you remove the anger? It's the control, the anger, the jealousy. How do you remap or re-educate that? But I've no doubt there are people out there that would say it's perfectly possible to do so, and psychologists and psychiatrists will say the methodology is there. Do we have the facilities available to do that? No. Should we? Very probably yes. And I think that's a question I could only answer after some proper research and attempts have been done to address it, and we just don't do it.
Yeah, I would tend to sort of think that optimistically that nobody is beyond hope. Some people are further away from it than others are, but I like to think nobody's beyond hope. But it's got to come from the individual, hasn't it? It's like an alcoholic.
Yeah.
Nobody telling you that you're alcoholic is going to start the healing process. The healing process starts with, I've got a problem and I recognize I've got a problem. I'm going to start trying to deal with it. And I think that's not anything that, much like alcoholics, they never say they're actually recovered. They're not healed. They've just learned to deal with it. They've learned to control it. And I think that's perhaps where a domestic abuser would probably need to get to, is that they now know they can control it, and they walk away and they step away and they think differently, whatever the processes are. So I think that would be an interesting. So
Bosco makes it a point, going back to the stage 4 about the educating the kids and hoping for the future. And Bosco says that perhaps educating kids to simply respect and be considerate to others is key here. And I think that does build in. It is a long-term approach, and we need to look at it in the long-term angle of it. And we do need to start, whether it be the police or another agency or through the schools or pastoral teaching in the schools. And we need to get back to that showing respect and consideration for other people. That may be, in the long term, a help or a way forward. What was Jill Russell? Would an approach that also looked to the perpetrator as a victim at times be useful? It's often a cyclical pattern. Look into the causes of behaviours. I mean, there is a lot of research that says people who have been abused go on to abuse. So there is a cycle there that can be broken, but not all. No.
Yeah.
But it does show that there's some suggestion and some research there. So possibly, I think, is the answer to that.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult, isn't it? I mean, even if we took it away from domestic violence and said, paedophilia, is the offender a victim? If they are, what are they a victim of? Are they ill? Is it a sickness there that needs to be addressed? And those are really difficult questions, because people tend to want to shut it out and say, well, hang on a minute, you've been messing with kids, and so therefore we don't want to think about that. We just want to lock you up and put you away because you're a danger. And so it's quite that sort of approach to seeing the perpetrator as a victim might be useful, but it's going to be an incredibly difficult thing for the person that they've abused to be able to deal with. And it's going to be an incredible difficult thing for society to accept, because we tend to scream out, we want justice and we want prison. And how many times have we seen a court case with the result come out and everybody on Twitter goes, it's not enough, it should be more, the sentence is pitiful. And it's quite... Yeah. That would be quite a change in society attitude to sort of say we've got a domestic situation here and we see both people as victims. That's quite a radical thought. It's a good interesting topic though, Jill. Thank you for the question.
I attended a meeting yesterday based around a relaunch of restorative justice in our area, and trying to look at that, and it was being discussed there that RJ is being tried in some areas, in relation to domestic incidents at some levels. I would imagine at the lower level, not the sort of horrific scenarios that I was discussing, and that created a lot of sharp intakes of breath in the room. And I must admit, I was me as well saying, what on earth are you talking about? The people explaining it were given a very, very balanced and evidenced argument for how it's been tried and working in other countries. Yeah. But it seems, at the moment, it just seems such an alien, alien concept that somebody who's been a victim of such an intimate type of attack and violence, and now somebody suggesting we'll sit you down in the room with a person who's been abused and you're beating the crap out of you for the last however many years, and it's all going to be pink and fluffy. We sat there thinking, what on earth? But there seems to be some research suggests that in some cases, it may be an option and it seems to work. I don't know. I don't know what your thoughts may be.
Who, my thoughts?
Either, how's yourself? Well, the restorative justice, where the two parties are brought together in some form of mediation. I appreciate it in circumstances as difficult as yours, it's unlikely. But if we look down to the lower end of the scale, if that's the right phrase, whether it could ever be an opportunity.
I think it's a very individual choice that somebody needs to make. So, I respect anybody's decision if that is something that they want to go, that's a line that they want to go down. My only concern with that is, I hope it doesn't become the norm, as in, okay, we're not going to start prosecuting, perpetrators because we're going to go down that route. It's not some. I mean, in my situation, obviously, it's not something that I would, that it would never ever. It's not something I would ever entertain.
The instant. Sorry, go on. Sorry.
And the same with that question that Jill asked in terms of, looking at the perpetrator as a victim. Again, I think I completely understand that every situation is different, and I can obviously only speak from my experience. My husband is ex-military, and he has no. There's no history of any form of him, being abused as a child or anything. I have no idea. I was asked numerous times, why do I think he did it? I have absolutely no idea. But he's ex-special forces, and I don't stand a chance against him. And it is for me, and I totally accept that I'm completely biased. It is horrific. That anybody can say to me, he is a victim in this. It's.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think Nathan's Nathan's in the room, but he's on a very short time scale, I think, so should give him an opportunity to say something before he flies off again.
Evening all.
Hi.
I've listened for about the last 20 minutes on my way into work, and I just wanted to say publicly thank you to Ivy. I've not been able to take part in the debate tonight because I've had to obviously prepare for work and stuff. But Ivy, your story, I missed the very beginning. I will watch it and listen to it with interest on the replay. But thank you so much for speaking, so eloquent, so brave, and so structured in what you're saying. That's all I wanted to say tonight. Absolutely fantastic. Really glad you came on. I think I can't wait to listen to the replay. Superb. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well said. Here.
And with that,
and with that
I am going to disappear
in a second
now and leave you guys to literally a flying visit. But thank you very much.
Take care. Have a
Thanks, Nathan.
Bye.
Bosco's put a thing across on the side here that said, perhaps instead of prison, offenders go to secure units for anger management therapy instead. I quite like that idea, just on the basis that it's a part that prison is a punishment, but it should also be rehabilitation, shouldn't it? And that's something that we, maybe we should get Frances Crook on at some point to talk about prisons. Now that would be interesting. But she's what's the name of the organisation now? The Prison Reform Crowd.
Howard.
Oh, what they're called? I can't remember. Somebody will pop it in the side for us.
Like Howard in there somewhere, isn't it?
Howard League. There you go. Alistair's done it. Howard League. So amazing. Should be really interesting. But if prison is about punishment, but also about reform, rehabilitation, well then, is there a way that we could be looking at putting people who commit domestic violence and domestic abuse into how they can redress that and how they can challenge that within themselves and and control those impulses, that behaviour, that driver that it is that makes them behave the way they do?
I don't know, but again, just jumping back on the RJ aspect just for a second, and the first and quite loud and quite repeated comment from most people in the room yesterday when this was suggested was, all that's doing is giving the offender more power over the victim, because even though both parties have to agree to go to this process, mediation process, a victim of such abuse is likely to still be in fear of the offender, and there's that great concern that they will just go along with what you're saying just because the fear of anything happening in the future. So I think that may link to that into what you're just saying about rehabilitation. It's a tough one, but how do we ensure, if we're just going to go down the rehabilitation side, how do we ensure that we continue to keep the victim safe? As the mediation is generally not suitable for pro situation where there is one person a dominant position. I think that's the point I was trying to make, Alistair. I don't know if you picked up on the conversation a very short while ago when I went to a meeting yesterday when there was a discussion about using RJ in domestic instances, and most of the police officers, if not all in the room, took a very great sharp intake of breath and thought, what on earth?
Can you envisage, and Ivy, you might have an insight on this really, can you envisage a situation with mediation where the two parties present at the appropriate place for mediation? They go through that process and it all seems to be as it should, and then they go home and the abuse carries on because the victim is being put into a situation where they say, you will say and do everything that I expect you to do to show that there's no problem going on here.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. I think you get so conditioned, my domestic violence has been going on 24 years. My relationship lasted 24 years, and there was nothing that I wouldn't say or do that he ordered me to say or do. So, if when I went to the police, if it was deemed that no, you got to go for mediation or RJ, absolutely, I wouldn't have even had a choice it would have just completely carried on, and I would have just, lost even more faith in being able to reach out for that help. So,
well, Ivy, going back to the original account that you gave, Ivy, again, the notes I made at the time, and the two interesting comments that you made there, and bear in mind that this whole process was about helping yourself, and you explained how you had to ask permission of the police to stay in a place at Christmas.
Yeah.
And that just struck me as, even though in really this is the releasing of you from the problem, you still felt the need that you hadn't got the power. You had to ask somebody if it was okay to do, and that just shows how the whole situation bears down on you such a level. I think that you don't have the control.
No, absolutely. And as you say, that it lasts a tremendous amount of time. It's a lot of work to be done to be able to get that back. Even now, I mean, the police force that I'm with have been absolutely fantastic, but and as much as realistically I'm still given a choice in whatever decisions are made. The DI even he laughs because whenever I get called for a meeting, I'm absolutely petrified of meeting him. And he, in a nice way, finds it quite amusing. He's like, I'm just calling you in for a meeting to see how it's going, But I'm absolutely petrified for me, the instant thought is, what have I done wrong? What am I going to be punished for now?
Do you think, I know it's a never really answerable question, do you think you'll ever get yourself to a position where things become normal, as in normal, not the perception of normal that's been generated for yourself over the last 20 plus years, but a normal relationship for you and your children, and enjoy a peaceful life? If that's...
I hope so. It's certainly going to take a lot of work, and I certainly work hard with the professionals that are involved in my case. But yeah, it will take years to be able to get to that position, I think.
Yeah, looks like we've lost TTS. I think he's just string's dried up. Oh no, he's back. He's back. Just again ripping through the notes. I know time's getting. We're already up to 10 o'clock. But quickly, and there is one area that I did want to bring up, mainly because of how often when we did the pre-tweets about the Blab coming up, and the one consistent chain of comment that kept coming in was about alcohol. And the blame of alcohol on domestic violence. And that, again, going back all those years, I saw people getting drunk and that's why it's happening. But when I started to dig into this, and you suddenly realise that it's no more than an excuse. If somebody's going to be an abuser, alcohol's not going to change that. There are lots of people responsible for domestic abuse that are stone cold sober, and alcohol's not going to make it worse. It might be an excuse. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Absolutely. There were very few of my assaults that were alcohol fueled. He was, as you say, stone cold sober. And it's one of my frustrations. In fact, when I first went to the police, the first police officer that I disclosed to, his simple answer was, "This doesn't happen in green, leafy, suburban wherever we were living." And there is that, as you said right at the beginning, there's that stereotype that it's on these
8th floor flats,
exactly,
house,
and all of them involve alcohol or drugs, and it doesn't. It happens in across the board in families, in the house next door to you. It's alcohol is not always a factor, and if people kind of rely on that, it's a dangerous perception in my books.
Yeah,
it is. I can remember the first time I turned up at a very large house with a few acres of land around it, and eventually the Jaguar on the drive, and myself and my colleagues sat there thinking, this can't be the right address. Because
it wasn't my place.
Where no, they only had the one Bentley, not the two. But when we went to the door, and it was like going to Armageddon, the carnage and the damage it would cause within the property. But again, that image when we drove up the driveway, and you pull up down this road, and you see this big long drive with gates, and you think, this can't be right. Oh well, it must be like cottages or something on around the back. You drive to the house, and nothing added up until you walk through the door, and that was just because of the image that we had of.
It's that tweet that I put out, isn't it, that says it knows no borders. Financial, social, religious, cultural, ethnic, the whole shooting match. It knows no boundaries, and if you sort of see a couple and think domestic abuse does not happen in that sort of section of society and all the rest of it, well, then you're wrong, because it does. And it's just the fact that stereotypes will sort of say, oh, it's council estates, and oh, it's just Alex coming in, who we know, so that's fine. It's council estates, it's alcohol, it's she deserved it, or she must have done something wrong, blah blah blah. And I know I've gone sort of he she there, which because we'd just like to reiterate that we do understand that men are subject to domestic abuse as well, but and they grew up in an abusive home, therefore it sort of explains that they're abusive there as well. And you think those are all nonsense, because it just touches everybody. There isn't a person in this room now, or a person that's been dropped in and dropped out, who can say their life, domestic abuse at some point hasn't had a touch on their life or in their close family somewhere.